Thanks, Steffi. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having us. This is always one of my favorite conferences, so really honored. So I'm, gonna ahead of myself here. So I'm Linda Abraham from comScore, and I'm going to talk today about the changing landscape of digital media measurement. And we've talked a lot about the changing landscape of digital at this conference, and that has a lot of implications for many of us in this room, everyone from media owners to advertisers to broadband providers to carriers. An increasing number of parties really want to understand how audiences are changing and how the monetization models need to evolve to kind of keep up with that. And so I'm going to address each of those points. But before I do, let me talk about a couple of things. One is, and I say this fully cognizant of the fact that I'm in front of a bunch of media people, but headlines can be deceiving. And so I think one of the things that's really important as we kind of move into this age of having multiple devices everywhere, really being conscious of what you're reading and what it means. And so a couple of good examples of that are some headlines that we saw in 2014, which talked about how the TV audiences are shrinking, evaporating, going away. So here are some good examples of some headlines. You see broadband-only homes are accelerating cable declines. You see sort of headlines around digital ad sales being on shaky ground. All these things are suggesting that younger people are really not watching TV anymore. And that is true in the traditional sense. They're not watching traditional TV. But in terms of content and in terms of how they continue to evolve as very interesting audiences, it couldn't be further from the truth. And so in order to really kind of get a handle on that, it really leads us to a place where we're not just measuring digital anymore, but we really need to look across the media landscape, including TV, traditional TV, to get a full picture of where content is going and how the monetization should evolve as a result. So to set the stage for that, let me talk about where we've come from. So, 10 years ago, when we, in the early days of comScore, in the early days of digital measurement, the landscape looked very different. We were looking at, you had sort of TV on the one hand, and you had kind of digital on the other, and what digital consisted of was primarily laptop usage, or desktop usage. It was primarily one operating system, of course, we had to learn some lessons from that, which is that you need lots and lots of people to measure the content as it becomes more and more fragmented. On television, you had a few stations to worry about measuring. Once digital came along, we had thousands and hundreds of thousands and ultimately millions of things to measure, and so it required a whole kind of revolution in measurement technology, which comScore was very much involved in. And the question always remained, who is it that's consuming the content? Who is it that's seeing the advertising? And these questions get more and more complicated the more ways there are to achieve those things. So that was 10 years ago. Obviously, we're looking at a very, very different landscape today. So different, in fact, that we've got, that 10 years ago I talked about sort of the fractionalization of options in terms of channels that you can consume content. And now you've got all of these devices. You have you've got cell phones, smartphones, you've got tablets, any number of other devices that you can consume content across. And now you have this fractionalization across devices as well, which has this sort of multiplicative effect and makes the measurement challenge very, very complicated. So one of the things that has not changed with all the changes that we've been talking about is the fundamental question that advertisers and basically anybody involved in the monetization of audiences cares about is kind of the reach and the frequency of advertising. So one thing that's very important is if you're going to serve 100 impressions, did you serve one to each of 100 people? Did you serve 10 to 10 people? Or how did that play out in terms of the reach and frequency? What percentage of an audience did you reach? And how many times did you reach them? That's sort of the age-old question at the center of monetization. And that's very important. And that's the part that's very, very difficult. It might be easy to measure how many times the server is being pinged or hit. If you're looking just at a smartphone, it might be easy to do the same thing if you're measuring a desktop. But really measuring the crossover and really getting it back to how many, what did any individual consumer do? That's really kind of the secret sauce, and that's really what's difficult about this measurement challenge. So, well, why is it hard, and what are the considerations? What are the challenges with this? Well, one is that you have to have an unduplicated audience. As I mentioned, being able to understand if I start out my day doing something on my laptop, and then I do something on my tablet, and then I do something on my smartphone, and then I get back to the office and I do something on a desktop, which of all of those devices, or what am I doing on those devices, and how can I sort of deduplicate it? That's a critical question. What are the demographics of those audiences? Demographics have to be accurately measured so that we can really understand digital content consumption in the context of how media is bought and sold. What is the language? And the language of that today is demographics. They also you have to think about this holistically. We have to think about it in terms of what if you've got an overall advertising budget and you're going to allocate it across a number of places, I want to understand it kind of in this holistic fashion that reflects media habits and opportunities across audiences. It's got to be scalable. One of the things we think a lot about at comScore is there's no such thing as a local geographic market anymore. You can automatically assume that audiences are going to cross borders, and so that has to be a very scalable model. It's also got to be flexible. Certain types of media measurement and device measurement are going to be more important to other parties depending on your business model, and we've got to make sure we've got all that right. So this is a big, big measurement challenge. We have a couple of data points to share quickly, and they kind of set the stage for what I'm going to talk about here, which are that millennials, if you look at, I'm looking at the total TV time, the total TV time by platform. And what you see is that older people are still spending the majority of their time on traditional channels, but younger people, they're only watching 66% of their time on traditional, whereas about fully a third of it is now digital. And so this phenomenon is going to continue, and that means that 1/3 of that audience can't even be reached through traditional channels. They cannot even be reached. So unless you have kind of a digital plan that you folded into your overall marketing plan, you're really going to be in trouble. Secondly, if we look at digital behavior totally, this is just about the last 3.5 years. What we see here is that there's been more than a doubling of time spent on the internet, and that's spent on digital, and that's kind of amazing. But perhaps the more important part of this chart is we see the 53.9% over there on the right-hand side. What that says is that of the new devices, smartphones and tablets are actually taking out the lion's share of activity on digital now. So they're becoming more important than traditional devices, even within digital. So that was an important milestone that was crossed in 2014 and really speaks to the importance of kind of where things are headed. I want to share with you some early results of a couple of research pieces that we've been spending time on and that really set the stage for what this cross-media world looks like. And here's some work we did for the Olympics. And what we did here was we looked at people that watched on TV only, and TV and laptop, and we kept adding on devices until all the way in the end there you have TV, laptop, mobile, and tablet. And what we actually found was almost the opposite of what the early headlines might have taught you to believe, and that is that the more devices you have, the more content you consume. And so if this turns out to be true generally, now this is early, it's only one example, but if it turns out to be true, that suggests is that, yes, there's all this fractionalization, but because people can watch more content in more places of their own time, of their own choosing, it could perhaps be expanding the pie for everyone. So that's very significant. Secondly, so another example, some early research that we did for ESPN looks at the reach. I talked about that notion of reach earlier, what percentage of an audience you reached. And what this says is that for men 18 plus for ESPN, what happens is you reach 29% or almost 30% of your audience with traditional TV, but by increasing it, by looking at adding in digital channels, you actually increase that reach by an entire 40%. And so really understanding what that reach is across channels is becoming very, very important. And I'm going to speed it up here. I have only about a minute left. But that all leads us to thinking about kind of where this is going. And that's why this theme of it's only the beginning is so appropriate, because this is a big, big, fat, juicy challenge for comScore and other companies that are really trying to get a handle on where content is going and how you're going to travel it and accurately measure it across devices. So for us, it's really at the beginning. I think 2015, you're going to start to see the fruits of some of the research that we have done over the last 2 years, and they're going to manifest themselves into new products which begin to really help us understand this in a way that can really follow audiences and can follow the money and can enable these monetization models going forward. So it's going to be a totally new day. So thank you very much.